I so I don't know how to word this properly. Ben Shapiro emailed me. Now, when I say Ben Shapiro emailed me, what I don't mean is he got on his personal email and sent me a loving letter about all the ways in which he hates me for my leftist tatas. No, what I mean is I have one of those lovely mass spam emails, but it is from Ben Shapiro's email. So this is going to be very interesting. We've got a little bit of email correspondence between me and Ben Shapiro, the robot, maybe. I don't know if he wrote this out himself for his personal email or if he had somebody else do it. But it was sent to me, so we gonna take a look at it. But before we do that, though, before we get into this lovely email, we do have the fan art section to look at. And from ACorp53, we have this wonderful, wonderful piece. It is very well detailed, and I actually immediately reached out to them to commission more work right after this fan art dropped, because, yeah, no, this was fucking great. As always, everyone, if you guys want to submit your fan art, the best way to do that is dropping it into the fan art section of the Discord. And the links to that are in the description of the video if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're watching on Twitch, links to that are in that lovely little link panel right next to my name on Twitch. So, with all that said, let's go ahead and get into the email from Ben Shapiro. And this is straight from my email. Like, yes, I have Yahoo Mail. And yes, that is a picture of me with GG up there. Because, well, why wouldn't it be? All right, so, from Ben Shapiro. Hey there. The institutions controlled by the left continue their authoritarian onslaught on free speech in America. Last week, YouTube demonetized biologist and podcaster Brett Weinstein, his Dark Horse channels, for discussing science that goes against the narrative that they have deemed acceptable. Stuff like this happens every single day. Okay, now, let's go ahead and very briefly take a look at... Oh, dear. That is loud. Every single time it happens. Every time it happens. Open sound set. No, I need open sound. Mixer. I had an opportunity to lower this earlier, and I didn't, and I am so sorry. Lulu has assaulted all of our ears today. So, who is Brett Weinstein? Because Brett Weinstein is actually someone who considers himself on the left in the United States. He would not typically be one of the people who you would expect something like this to happen to, except for what happened specifically here. Let me go ahead and pull up his page real quick. So, let's go down to politics real quick, because this will be important for the actual subject matter at hand. Politics. Following his resignation from Evergreen... Or that's post-Evergreen. No, I want politics. He's married. He is an evolutionary biologist who's also worked at Evergreen. He resigned from the college along... Haing resigned from the college along with Weinstein. That's the person he married. And they took a similar position during the day of absence controversy, which I am not familiar with, but clarification is needed on there anyway. Weinstein describes himself as a political progressive and left libertarian. He has appeared for the U.S. House of Oversight Committee on May 22nd to discuss freedom of speech on college campuses. So, let's go ahead. He doesn't seem to be somebody who we would generally consider to be terribly yikesy, so what would have actually gotten him hit? Then again, if it's something about COVID, I think most everybody can understand right now, with the amount of disinformation that happens with COVID and where COVID's concerned, getting demonetized for doing something about COVID, as much as it sucks, it's kind of to be expected. Like, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened to me for me covering COVID stuff that I have on my channel, because by covering disinformation, YouTube will demonetize your stuff just as quickly, because in many cases the bots can't tell the difference between coverage and literally just accepting those things. This isn't really me trying to excuse that, though. This is just kind of the reality of how YouTube operates right now. Big tech, aka private companies, have been weaponized to perform the left's bidding, to silence dissenters, and paint speech as violence. This is the greatest authoritarian threat of our time. YouTube demonetizes, Amazon deplatforms, Facebook limits reach and slaps bogus fact checks on things, and Twitter squashes the spread of information. Ultimately, you and I get censored for saying what they don't want while they hide behind sham content policies. So, here's the thing, though. For this email, I understand the frustration with, like, Silicon Valley. I do. Starborg TV, thank you very much for the follow. But what Ben Shapiro does here is he puts emphasis on the private part of those companies. If I were to ascribe intent, I would say to almost delegitimize the idea that they're private, because he does the same thing when he talks about the sham content policies in this part of the email. That part is also emphasized, which leads me to believe that there's a connection between the content policies and the private part. As it stands currently, YouTube, despite having a pseudo-monopoly on video streaming in the way that... user-focused video streaming, mind you, the same way that we would find on other websites like Dailymotion and stuff and TikTok. Long-form video streaming content of that form, YouTube has effectively monopolized. When you think of watching user-generated content on the internet, you think of YouTube. When you think of short-form text content, you think of Twitter. When you think of social media, one of the first names that comes to mind is Facebook. When you think online shopping, you generally think Amazon. However, here's the thing. This isn't an issue with the left, because people who are on the left get hit just as often as people who are on the right by pretty much all of these areas. I got demonetized. I used to get demonetized a lot. I don't know what changed recently. Apparently now I can flat out throw up Sonic the Hedgehog porn on my channel, and that content just gets allowed now, which is weird. In stark contrast to what it used to be. I used to get a lot of demonetizations. But outside of me, there are plenty of people on the left and plenty of people on the right who do get hit with demonetization. Mind you, demonetization doesn't mean that your channel's taken down. The influence of your channel is significantly halted, but you still have your channel. You're not necessarily being censored. Ben wants to try to argue that this is all the left's bidding. However, if the left, quote-unquote, had its way, these private companies wouldn't exist. They would all be various forms of public works operations. They would be publicly owned. They would not be private companies. Ben is very much part of the economic right. The privatization of these companies, them being allowed to hold monopolies, is very much in line with what he wants. This is very much a, hey, this is the bed that you have fought for. You kind of need to sleep in it at this point, Ben. As opposed to emailing me bitching about it. Like, believe me, I've got all the time in the world to laugh at this and just go, yeah, no, I agree that, you know, Amazon and Facebook and YouTube and all these places have a very firm monopoly where information and shopping and stuff like that on the internet is concerned. But you cannot be Ben Shapiro, who simps for large corporations all the time, including in how his shows get funded by the Koch brother. You can't do that, and then, like, you can't be bedfellows with those gigantic corporations and then be upset when the existence of gigantic corporations doesn't work in your favor. And yet, all we hear from the media, another institution at the service of the left. Whoa, that's an interesting one. So, the media as an institution in service of the left. Okay, so I'm in the middle of reading fucking... right now, I am in the middle of reading Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky. And while he might agree that there is certainly a political agenda that gets spun within the media to argue that it is necessarily left or right, when there are just as many instances of a CNN as there are of a Fox News, is kind of ludicrous. The existence of far-right political organizations like Fox News pretty much runs completely counterintuitive with the idea that the media is an institution in service to the left.
All we hear from the media is that conservatives are the threat. Conservatives are destroying democracy with voter ID laws and critical race theory bans. And Trump was the greatest risk to freedom in modern America history because of his mean tweets.
All right, so nobody ever said that Trump was a risk to freedom in America because of his mean tweets. We generally used his tweets as a medium to showcase what the unfiltered thoughts of Trump were, because that's largely what Twitter was. But it's not because of his mean tweets that he was a great risk to American freedom. The ways in which he negatively influenced our position on the global stage, the way he pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord, the way that he threatened our relations with other United Nations countries, the way that he showcased America as a fucking laughingstock for everyone, and the way that he, as a president, not only followed several tenets that Umberto Eco would consider fascist, but did things that actively harmed Americans, trying to deregulate a lot of our industry, stuff that regulations had been put up in order to make sure that things were safer, trying to push things like asbestos as being perfectly A-OK, especially in other countries. These are things that reflect on Trump's presidency. Gassing people at a church so that he can have a photo shoot with an upside-down Bible. These are all things that reflect on him. When he calls for violence against people who just happen to associate with the name Antifa, when he called everyone who was participating in the January 6th riots special, instead of outright and telling them that they were completely justified in what they were doing, while also trying to say out of the other cheek that they should be going home, and that he loves them very much. Like, these are all things that reflect on Trump and reflect on the negative attitude that will be held about him in the coming years. I think Ben Shapiro wants to live in a world where presidents like Trump are viewed very positively years in the future. I don't know if that's going to happen with Trump. I think he's going to continue to be a blemish. Imagine thinking that people legitimately think that it's just Trump's tweets that are the problem, when this is the president that has been actively, even after losing the presidential race, has been actively pushing a conspiracy theory that he won the election and that the current president's win was illegitimate. A president that actively pushes us closer to something like a banana republic is not the type of president that I think America should have, that any country should have. And his existence in power is a threat to democracy. But, according to Ben Shapiro in this email, it's just his mean tweets. That's all we're upset about. Erickson, thank you very much for redeeming the posture check and the stretch. And John Childers, thank you very much for redeeming an oh well. Oh well. Continuing on with the email. But make no mistake, it isn't conservatives coming after people's rights to speak and think freely. The left wants total control. They want you to bend to their will, to conform to their idiotic and anti-science pronoun usage. Women share locker rooms, playing fields, and even prison cells with men. And everyone smile and nod while they revisit lockdowns and travel bans under the guise of public health. So, Ben, I have a question. What is the problem with lockdowns? Is it that they are a violation of our freedoms? Because I would say that that's not the issue. Because while our freedoms get restricted by lockdowns in the immediate, they are there for our survival. However, in America, lockdowns have been largely ineffective due to the spotty nature in which they were utilized and due to our own governments, largely pushed by your side of the aisle, Ben. That side's inability to actually help people in need. People who are... Here's how a lockdown works correctly. Also, Root Noob, thank you very much for the subscription. And Yabi Snooki and the Atomizer, thank you very much for following. So, Ben, for a lockdown to work, you need to have funding available for the people who are in lockdown. Over and above a $1,200 just kind of thrown at their doorstep, or $600 just kind of thrown at their doorstep, you need an actual substantial amount of money that is going to the American populace during the time that they are in lockdown. Several other first world countries have actually done this, and it did not deplete their treasure supply. The United States, however, magically somehow as the richest nation in the country, was unable to do that. The problem with the lockdowns is that they largely fucked over people who were running small businesses, and they fucked over people who might not have been able to, or who are barely able to work to begin with, because we did not properly support people during lockdowns. We just instigated them and hoped for the best. And even with lockdowns, they were instituted in one of the most spotty ways possible compared to other countries. To hit on more in here, the left wanting total control. This is part of Ben's narrative that the left is necessarily authoritarian, despite the fact that there are authoritarian leftists and there are far more libertarian leftists. In fact, actually, that's exactly what Brett Weinstein, someone you talked about earlier in the email, considers themselves. Nobody wants you to bend to will. We want you to stop being an intolerant fuckshit. Ben says in this portion that we're trying to have people conform to anti-science pronoun usage. Pronoun usage is not a scientific thing. This is a category error on Ben Shapiro's part. Pronoun usage is not about anti-science, it is about the development of language, something that someone like Ben Shapiro, who argues against the usage of a singular they, doesn't fucking understand in the slightest outside of what is required to help the Koch brother continue shooting money up his butthole. When he talks about what makes a woman, he barely fucking understands it. He thinks woman just means vagina. Despite not understanding how those work either. Wet-ass P-word motherfucker. But when we're talking about the sharing locker rooms, playing fields, and prison cells with men, now we're talking about the trans people in sports issue. We're talking about stuff that we actually have data on. So with trans people in sports, if they were going to dominate sports in the way that Ben Shapiro and others of his ilk fear, we would have already seen it by now, because the Olympics has allowed trans people in sports for a very long time. We do not see that kind of domination, so I'm going to go ahead and dismiss that point. On the topic of prison cells with men, on the topic of locker rooms, this generally is a point that is brought up in conjunction with trying to say that women are going to get sexually assaulted by men. So he thinks that trans women are men, therefore trans women going into any of these areas automatically makes them a threat to the women in those areas, except for the fact that that's not what happens. What tends to happen, though, is that when we force trans women to go into men's locker rooms, the rate of sexual assault increases a lot. And if you consider it as a matter of numbers, it makes sense. Having a single trans woman in a locker room with potentially 20 or 30 other cis men, if you're going to say that men are predatory, and that's going to be your reason for saying that a trans woman in a woman's locker room is the issue, then by the numbers, a trans woman being in a locker room filled with several men is automatically more of a threat to the trans woman, and we have numbers to back this one up, than having a single trans woman in a woman's locker room, if the women are not equally predatory, which Ben Shapiro likely wouldn't say they are, because it would undermine his entire point here. Continuing on with the email here. But I didn't write to just sound the alarm on what the left is doing. We've already been seeing these trends for years. I'm writing because I think there's something we can do about it. Our silent majority that opposes the left's ludocracy and cherishes American liberty has been largely apathetic. But there is a way to fight back. So to think that the, quote, silent majority has been largely apathetic is to mean that Ben has either not paid attention to politics in the last 5 years or is deliberately trying to sell us on a lie. We've seen recent victories with irate parents standing up to school boards regarding the teaching of critical race theory. I wonder if Ben can actually, talk about critical race theory, what it is. Because what I tend to see when people talk about critical race theory on the right is they think that critical race theory says that everybody is judged by the immutable characteristics of their skin color, which is not what CRT does. CRT looks at systems. So, for instance, Ben Shapiro's idea of CRT, he's not shown in this email. This is based off of other content of his that I've seen him talk about it. His understanding of CRT would largely lead him to believe that if we saw a banker and the banker would not allow a loan to go through for a black person, that a CRT advocate would say that the banker is racist. Except that's not what would happen. Nobody is saying that that makes the banker a racist or that being a banker is a racist thing to be. What CRT does is it looks at the history of why that person might have been disapproved for that loan. It would see the fact that in the 1930s, there was a deliberate push to section black people into their own areas and segregate them in the United States, and then impoverish those areas. And as a result, there were geographical lines drawn over who could and could not get housing loans. And those geographical lines happened to line up exactly with the zones where black people were or were not allowed to be at that point. So it just happened that white people were able to get housing and they were able to get loans from the bank, and minority groups who were in these impoverished areas were not. And the defense was always that, well, they don't want to give high-risk loans to people in impoverished areas. And then, of course, there were other issues where they would give, where when loans could be given, they would be given at such high interest rates as a way to supposedly mitigate the risk, which would cause African Americans to be stuck in a debt loop and not be able to generate any generational wealth later on down the road, despite the ending of Jim Crow. Are there black people who are wealthy? Yes, but CRT would look at all of this and go, all of this led to the final decision of the banker, meaning that the banker who denies the loan is not racist, but the system, the institution, the mechanisms surrounding them led to a decision that ultimately was on racial lines, despite the banker not trying to be. CRT does not look at whether or not you're a racist in your heart of hearts. It looks at racial lines of discrimination in systems. These are completely separate things. Spanish Mosche says, is this an alternate channel? I've never been. I don't know what this would be an alternate channel from. But continuing on, Ben's not understanding what critical race theory is, and I don't even know if this version of CRT that he's angry about is actually taught in schools. It certainly wasn't taught to me, and I live in the fucking South. A couple of weeks ago, a bold woman caused a scene at an LA spa that allowed a trans woman, a man, because of course he's got to have the misgendering in there, to expose himself to a woman, including young girls in a women's locker room. The tide may be turning, but this isn't enough. We need to wake up. We need more of this. The silent majority has to fight back. Okay, we need more of this. This is an interesting thing for him to say. Because does everybody know how, like, that incident at the spa turned out? Does everybody know? Holy shit, Root Noob, thank you so much for gifting the tier 1 subs. Thank you so fucking much for all of that. Spanish Moss says from Just Plain Suris. No, actually, so Nekosuris is, it's the same thing on Twitch. I tried to have a Nekosuris Twitch channel for doing gaming, and then I just ended up moving all my streaming over here. So it was a separate thing at one point. Now it's not. But on YouTube, Suris is for my political content, and Nekosuris is for gaming content. But on Twitch, there is no such divide. So with the spa incident, I'm going to say how it ended, and then I'm going to go into the actual incident itself, just to show why the we need more of this is stupid. A protest ended up happening outside the spa, trying to get, like, super angry at the presence of trans people in the spa, and as a result, one of the anti-trans protesters tried to stab what they thought was a counter-protester, but it was just another fucking protester. The TERFs stabbed themselves. The TERFs literally stabbed themselves. Ben thinks we need more of this? He's a fucking idiot. Now, let's go look at that actual incident. Maybe this would be important.
Earlier this month, violent protests erupted outside a Korean spa in Los Angeles after a customer complained in a viral Instagram video about a naked transgender woman being allowed in the female section of the facility. But authorities have yet to find any evidence that a transgender person was even at the spa, suggesting that the entire incident was staged. Ben Shapiro, we need to wake up. We need more of this. News article about the incident was probably staged. The outlet also points out that the Instagram user who uploaded the video, which made its way onto Tucker Carlson's Fox News show, has an account that posts mostly Christian memes, raising questions about why she would have gone to a spa that's well known for accepting LGBTQ customers. Which means that somebody deliberately went here to start fucking problems. A protest in support of the Instagram user turned violent over the last weekend, with a video showing one right-wing demonstrator hitting a filmmaker with a pipe and another pulling out a gun, telling those around him that it's something to shoot you with. And there's an entire timeline of the events here for anybody who wants to go through the entire timeline. But Ben Shapiro thinks we need more of this shit. He thinks we need more of this. Apparently. Ben, weren't you famously against violence at BLM protests? Weren't you against all of that because violence is not a way to communicate these things? Why would you, Ben Shapiro, be advocating for more of this shit that leads directly to violence? Violence that apparently ends up in your own people getting piped. And not in the good and fun way. I digress for a shameless plug. I actually go into strategies for this in greater detail in my newest book, The Authoritarian Moment. Because to me, the most important part of this mess is how we stop and change the course to return to liberty. We must reclaim our institutions of the left. Or from the left. So let's keep standing up for our rights and fighting on behalf of our values. And if it would help you on this mission, pre-order my book today. I think there's hope for us to overcome the authoritarian threat. So we can't give up. Do not stay silent. Thank you for being here. Ben Shapiro, editor emeritus, The Daily Wire, host of The Ben Shapiro Show. P.S. You can pre-order your copy of The Authoritarian Moment now to make sure it's in your hands as soon as humanly possible after it's released, because all of us have to join this movement together. So, what was this email ultimately, aside from a call to violence against trans people from earlier in the fucking thing, aside from bitching about YouTube demonetizing people as per its policies on COVID misinformation, what was it except a giant advertisement for his book? How the Left's Weaponized America's Institutions Against Dissent. Jesus Christ. Everything is 1984 to these people. Everything is 1984 to these people. So apparently, Ben Shapiro emailed me to try to sell me his book. Ben, are you okay? Spongy Lord, of course you can post a link. You're allowed to post links. Jesus Christ. Did Ben Shapiro contradict himself? He always does that. He's so good at that. I just find it funny that this whole email, this whole thing, how do we save free speech in America? Well, the tool to learn how to do so is my book, The Authoritarian Moment, which you can use. But you know what? We have a rule. We have a rule. Whenever a plug happens, we have to plug ourselves. So, here, let's go ahead and plug ourselves here, because that's the rule. Every single time someone like Ben tries to plug, then we have to do it for ourselves as well. And not DDLG Playground today. No, we actually have another sponsor now. This channel has two sponsors. We have DDLG Playground, of course, coupon code Suris, but also we have Artesian builds. They build infinitely customizable PCs. You can you give them a budget. You can even tell them to surprise you. You give them a budget to work with, and they can build you a gaming PC. And they build gaming PCs for a lot of other YouTubers as well. They will upgrade whatever PC that you have and try to build
a new rig for you. You can get $100 off of whatever rig you are trying to build by using my coupon code NECOSURIS. That will automatically give you a discount, and also it will give me a little bit of kickback as well, because that is how these things work. And they will give you an optimized PC based on the budget that you are going for. So if you tell them, hey, I've only got, a couple $1,000s to work with for this gaming PC, they will try to get you the best hardware possible for that. And if you give them a lower budget, they will try to give you the best possible hardware for that budget. And if you can't afford a PC, because like most other people who live and breathe in the United States, you don't have $2,000 lying around. I know I don't. It would go immediately to my dental debt and taxes if I did. They also support financing. You can actually get your PC financed for as little as $100 a month from them, if that is how you want to go about picking up your PC. And again, whichever way you end up going about it, if you do it through Artesian Builds, please use coupon code NECOSURIS. There's a link to their website in the description of the video if you are watching this on YouTube, and there is a link that you can find over on Twitch as well by just hitting !Artesian. And that will give you the ability to see everything over on Twitch. But yeah, no, just as always, the rule is when you plug, I plug. That's how we do this. So, thanking Artesian Builds for sponsoring this channel, and also thanking you. I want to thank all of you for watching this episode. I know that this is a weird one. The idea of getting an email from Ben Shapiro calling for random-ass shit and then also trying to sell me something, while hilarious, is also kind of strange. But hopefully, we all had fun on this very, very awkward journey down email lane. As always, though, I want to thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being here. Hit the like button on this if you haven't already, if you are watching over on YouTube. Follow over on Twitch if you haven't already. Speaking of that, Poison, Sumic, and Masochist, thank you both for the follows. If you want to support the channel, there's many ways to do that in the description, as well as, of course, the Artesian Builds link if you want to buy something from them and support my channel as a result of that. But with all that said, everyone, as always, insert end of video tagline here.